All right, we're going to get started, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out to our Intro to Adobe Illustrator workshop. I'll actually just jump right into it. So the two people who will be explaining the workshop to you are myself and Alex. We are both on the design team, and I'm also on the logistics team. So if you have any questions afterwards and you're on Slack, feel free to ping us with questions. We're more than happy to answer them. And just really briefly, we're coming to you as SB Creative Lab today. And if you haven't heard about us, we are a very new design org at UC Santa Barbara. And our main goal really is to build this inclusive design community at our campus. We're huge advocates for growth, education, and creativity across various design disciplines. And actually for this academic school year, we've decided to focus on graphic design, illustration, and also UI UX. This workshop is part of the graphic design series. So just to give a little context there. And like this current workshop, some other opportunities we'll be providing in the future quarters will be design challenges and also potentially a design-a-thon in spring. So stay tuned for that. And without further ado, we'll jump right in. So what is Illustrator? Well, Illustrator is actually an industry standard vector editing software. And you might be wondering, like, what does that mean? So what makes it so special is because it is vector, you're creating images and objects and shapes based off of points and paths. And the reason why that's so important is because you end up with images that are scalable, meaning if you blow them up or make them really small, no matter what you do, what size they come at, you never lose the resolution of that image. If you had attended our Adobe Photoshop workshop earlier, I believe this month, we had called those programs a raster-based program. And so the biggest difference between the two is for raster-based programs, they're being created by pixels. And so if you try blowing them up, you'll unfortunately end up with like a little grainy texture on the sides. But with vectors, you completely avoid that issue. And third bullet point really basically illustrates that you have clean shaped, smooth lines, and you can also use text with that as well. And this program is very commonly used by graphic designers and illustrators alike. And so we can see some examples on the next slide here. At the top left, I'm sure you recognize all three, but logos are also one of the most common ways that graphic designers used vector-based programs for. Because you look at them and you can see that all the lines are really crisp, clean, and sharp. If you look over on the top right, there are also some very basic icons. You see the save one here, search, power, Wi-Fi. These are also generally created with vector-based programs. And looking at the bottom, they're not only just applied in logos or visual branding applications, you can also use them to create art. And so there's obviously a lot of different art styles out there, but this is one type of art that you can create with vector-based programs.
So during this workshop, we're going to be alternating between info slides, just sort of explaining what Illustrator is and how to use it, and a live demo. So if you'd like to follow along with us, you can either do that real time or you can do it afterwards once we post the recording of our workshop. If you want, you can use a different vector program. We've actually listed some free alternatives in the chat, like Figma and Vector, but it will be a little bit different than Illustrator because of the workspace. So just keep that in mind. And I'm going to post a link right now to our demo instructions if you'd like to follow along. So that's in the Zoom chat. And we're going to get started by talking about the interface. So the workspace is what we call the overall layout of Illustrator. And you can choose from a bunch of default workspaces or you can customize your own. For this demo, we're going to be using what's called Essentials Classic. And you'll see what that looks like in just a second. Panels are areas that group together different tools and settings that are all related. And then you can show or hide or move these around. So you probably only want to have the ones that you need on your workspace so that it doesn't get too confusing and cluttered. And then if things get super weird because you like resized your panels wrong or something, you can just reset them by picking a default workspace from the Windows menu. We're not going to go over all the panels because there are a lot of them, but the most important one is Properties, which lets you edit different properties of any object that you've selected. So if you want to go ahead and open up Illustrator, we can take a look at the workspace. So the first thing we're going to do is create a new document. And for this demo, we're going to be using the default common template, which is 1366 by 768. And you can see the workspace over here. We've got the properties, layers, and libraries panels on the right. We've got a toolbar with all the different tools on it, both on the left, and then you can see more panels are accessible on the right. If your workspace does not look like this to begin with, go ahead and go to Window at the top, and then pick Workspace and Essentials Classic. And as you can see on our document, we have a big white rectangle, and this is called an artboard. If you're familiar with raster programs like Photoshop, it's basically the same thing as a canvas in that it's sort of the frame that all of your work is going to go in. Unlike Photoshop, you can have multiple artboards in one document, and usually you want to make your artboard the same size as the page or the window that you're designing for. And you can add, remove, and resize these with the Artboard tool.
The reference image?
Okay, the first thing we're going to do in our demo after you set up your artboard is to choose reference photo. So there's a folder linked in the demo instructions if you want to pick from photos there, but Esther already has hers downloaded. So we're going to go up to File, Place, and place the image in our document. And when you do this, you want to click on the template checkbox. Did you do that?
I can do it after. Hold on.
Okay, if you check the template box, it will automatically make your image less opaque and lock it into place so that you don't have to worry about accidentally moving it around afterwards.
And since I missed that step, that's not an issue at all. If you head over to the right side under Layers, if you double click on the layer, the template button reappears, so it's not a problem at all. And this will actually serve as our reference image. So I will label it as such. And what it does is it makes the image look lighter, and so it's easier to draw on top of or trace with after. Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
Oh, that was pretty much it. We just want to have the reference image on the bottom so that we can use it as a template for the rest of our picture that we're going to create. And if you want to head back to the PowerPoint.
Perfect. So as I explained earlier for what Illustrator is, everything is pretty much made up of paths. And specifically, they are created with anchor points and handles. And you'll be using the pen tool, which we'll talk about in the next slide, to actually determine exactly where you're placing the anchor points, how to edit them, and so forth. They're really important because as you're placing anchor points, these little barbell, almost like gym weights things show up, and you're able to drag them down, drag them up, and that influences how deep or how shallow your curve is. And that might sound confusing, but don't worry, we'll show you step by step what that looks like. And as explained, for the pen tool, this is the actual tool that will be creating these paths. The one thing I would like to bring your attention to is actually the third point here. I found this really useful as a beginner myself. It's actually when you're creating paths, if you want to create a sharp corner, if you just double click on the anchor point, it'll make that switch automatically for you. And actually, the easiest way to teach you that is just to demonstrate on the board. So just for the purpose of demonstrating, I'm going to use this white space here. The pen tool is located on the left side, the third icon. So right there. You can also use a keyboard shortcut P if you'd like to, but I'm just showing you where the tool is. So you can click anywhere on the board, and that's the first anchor point you place. Now, if I click anywhere else on the board, it just creates a path. Now, earlier I mentioned you can create curves, and so how do you do that? So I hit enter to end that point. I'm going to start a new one. So again, click anywhere on the board. And to demonstrate the curve, when you click anywhere else on the board, click and hold it. And then you can drag your mouse around. And you can see these, like I said, it looks like gym weights coming out. These are the anchor handles that you can influence to determine how big or how small your curve is. And to demonstrate that, you can see if I move closer towards the anchor point, the influence of the curve is very small. But if I pull the anchor points out very wide and try to toggle them, the curve is suddenly very large. And so there's so much power and a lot of control you have with this tool. I would say with Illustrator, the hardest thing you probably would do as a beginner is sort of understanding and learning, getting the hang of using this pen tool. But I will delete this for now. And now we can head back to the whole board. Take it away, Alex.
Okay, yeah, so the first thing that we're gonna do is actually using the pen tool to create a line down the middle. Because we want our shape to be symmetrical, we need to find the midpoint. So you're going to select the pen tool from the left toolbar.
I will do that, but before, real quick, we want to make sure the image is sized properly on the artboard. So actually, we'll click the image, or now you realize our artboard's very small in comparison to our reference image. And what you can do is you can put your mouse over one of the corners to resize it. Now, a trick I will teach you is actually make sure you click Shift and hold Shift as you do this. And the reason why you want to do that is because you want to preserve the aspect ratio of your image. And just to demonstrate, if you forgot that trick, you would then end up with maybe some wonky looking raccoons. So make sure you preserve the aspect ratio. And if you make mistakes, you can easily use Control-Z to undo any of them. So I'm going to place this little guy maybe a little closer to the center, make it a little smaller, and I will call it a day. So Alex had said a pen tool.
Okay, if you're ready to create the line then, you're going to draw it from the top midpoint to the bottom midpoint. So we're going to do this with the automatic smart guides that should show up on the canvas. When you hover your cursor over basically where the midpoint is, it will automatically snap to that point. And if it doesn't, then go to the View menu at the top of your page and then check the box that says Smart Guides. It's near the bottom. Yeah, right over there. And then you can hit Enter to release your line once you're done with it. One problem we have right now is that we can't actually see the line very well. So if you want to change the color, you need to select the line and then use the box on the bottom left that's white right now and change that to none and change the stroke to black.
And you can do so by double clicking on it, or actually,
I think you're on fill right now. Yeah.
I am on fill. You said no fill, so here's the none button. And for the stroke, which is the second box, we can use, did you give a color? I forgot.
I think black is good. Yeah.
Okay, great. And for the purpose of the demonstration, we'll actually make the stroke a little thicker so you can see, but when you're working on your own canvas, you don't need to make it this thick.
Okay, and now that we have our center line, the next thing we're going to do is draw the first side of our base shape. Yeah.
And before we do that, we're actually going to make a new layer so it doesn't impact what we're working on. And we'll call this the face shape. And as I demonstrated earlier with the pen tool, you can go back to it. So again, either use keyboard shortcut P or click on the third icon from the left. And just go ahead and using Shift, hold it, and then click anywhere on this line to start. Holding down Shift tells Illustrator that you are continuing and picking off of a line. And so that's really important to do if you want to continue anywhere from where you left off. And I'm just going to begin tracing the face shape of the raccoon. So that trick I said earlier about double clicking, now is the perfect time to do it. It might be hard to see now, but if you look closely, there's a little caret sign that shows up once I hover my pen tool back on a point. And if I double click on that, it gives me the swap instantaneously. You no longer see a curve. So I'm just going to continue working off of the shape of this raccoon. We'll go a little quickly.
See there how Esther switched from the curved lines to the straight lines within the same path, just by using that double click trick and then dragging the handles again to create another curved path. This is, yeah, like we said, it's probably the hardest part of using Illustrator, but it just takes a lot of practice. And then once you reach the end of your path, you can hit enter, and then you have a completed path. So I think we're going to go back to the PowerPoint. And now I'm going to talk about two tools that are going to be really useful, the regular and direct selection tools. So the regular selection tool is just the normal one that you're going to use to select a whole object or a shape. It's really useful for changing the properties or moving things. And then the direct selection tool lets you select a specific anchor point or a segment of a path. So this is really useful for if you didn't make your shape exactly how you wanted it to be and you want to go back in and change it manually. So you can demonstrate this on the half of the raccoon head that we have so far. If you switch to the direct selection tool, you can select a specific anchor point in order to fine-tune the shape of things.
Yeah, and so you can look at the tool at the top left. They look very similar, so make sure you pick the correct one. You can also use the keyboard shortcut A. And let's say, for example, I wanted some of these hair points to stick out a little more. So I'm going to select the point and maybe pull on it and extend them.
And make sure you're double clicking when you do this.
That's right. Make sure you double click. Very important. If you don't double click, you might end up moving the entire shape, which is clearly not what you want to do. So, but it's okay if you make mistakes. Illustrator is very forgiving. So it's easy to to just use Command Z or Control Z, depending on what device you have, to make fixes. And you can also use the direct selection tool to influence and reshape your curves. So for example, if I thought this wasn't curvy enough, I would have just clicked on the anchor point, and then the little barbell weight shaped handle shows up. And then I can pull it up, pull it down to whatever my heart's desire is.
So yeah, I think we're about good with this side. So the next thing we're going to do is show you how to use transformations to copy it to the other side. Most transformations in Illustrator are pretty basic, like moving something or changing the size or rotating it. Shearing is a little bit different in that you change the angle that something is at. So instead of scaling it uniformly, it's going to end up tilting or skewing it. And what we're going to use right now is called reflect, which just flips your shape horizontally or vertically. So if we go back to the raccoon, we're going to use the regular selection tool to select the whole half of the shape. And then if you use Control C or Command C and then Control V or Command V, we will make a copy of it. Oh, make sure you got the whole thing. And then if you select this half and go to the Properties panel, you can see that there's these little two triangles facing each other, and you can use that to flip it horizontally. And then you can just move it to line up with the other half, and you have a full symmetrical shape. So I want to take a break here and just ask if anybody has any questions, or if we're going too fast. If you guys are following along, just let us know. You can either just speak up or type in the chat. If not, then the next thing we're going to do is unite both halves of our shape so that it creates one shape in instead of two separate paths. So you want to click on the first one with the regular selection tool, hold Shift and click on the second one. This is going to select both of your shapes. And then there's a little icon under Pathfinder in the bottom right corner of the Properties panel. The leftmost one will unite these into a single shape. We're not going to go over all of the Pathfinder actions right now, but they're pretty useful to get to know if you use a lot of shape building in your projects. And now that we have a full shape, we're just going to go ahead and change the color of it with the same bottom left tool that we used earlier. So if you select it, We can set the stroke to none and then set the fill color to whatever you want.
So Illustrator, actually, disclaimer, has so many different ways of doing things. So we had shown you the left side of making changes in colors. There's also the right side. So again, we can set the stroke to none, 0. And for color, if you use the one on the right, they give you some pre-filled colors. But if you want to make your own, then I would say the left side would be easier for you to do. Double click on it, and then you can just drag the bar to whatever color you'd like. And that is the basic face shape. So moving back into the presentation, before we continue building out the raccoons, a really important tool in Illustrator as well is the Shapes tool. There are actually 6 subtools under the Shapes tool itself, and they're all listed here. Personally, I think the most commonly used ones are actually the top row. So it'd be rectangle tool, polygon tool, and ellipse tool. A few neat tricks to keep in mind is for both the rectangle and ellipse tool, if you click and hold shift, it actually preserves the shape to maintain. On the left side, it would be a square, and for ellipse tool, it'd be a circle. And so I can demonstrate that in a little bit, so don't worry about it. And for the polygon tool, it's really neat in that once you're creating it, it'll actually start off as a triangle. And if you toggle your arrow keys up and down, it will either increase or decrease the number of legs and sides that the shape has. So probably the easiest way to explain that is to just demonstrate that for you. And so to locate the Shapes tool, it's actually on the left side. 1, 2, 3, 4, the 5th tool. Mine is automatically on the ellipse tool because I was using it earlier, but generally it will be on the rectangle tool first. So just to show you on the side here, if you just click and drag out, you would get your rectangle shape. But if you use the shift hold down, like I said, click shift, hold down, and drag out, no matter what you do, how big or small it is, you will be creating a square. And likewise can be said for the ellipse. So again, to change it, you would right click and then select whichever tool you'd like. So just really quickly, you can make an ellipse, kind of oval-like shape, but if you hold shift, preserving a circle. And for the neat polygon trick, again, right click on the tool and select polygon. And you can draw a basic shape. Okay, it's not a triangle, hexagon. But if you use your arrow key down as you're drawing it, so before I let go, if I use arrow key up, you can see that the shape is increasing in legs. And if I continue to decrease, I can bring it down to a triangle shape. So the polygon tool has a lot of different functionality. It's easy to change in between shapes. And we don't need these shapes, so I will get rid of them for now and move back to the presentation. We actually are demonstrated color, but just really briefly, for a lot of Adobe products, generally, we refer to the color with stroke and fill. So the inside of the shape or object you've created is considered fill, and the area surrounding it is considered stroke. So back to the raccoon. We want to give the raccoon a little bit more features so you can actually tell it's a raccoon. I'm actually going to create a new layer for this. So if I went to the layers panel here, in order to make a new layer, you'd actually just head down here on the bottom right, click create new layer, and it'll do that. Let's actually create, let's say, eyes and nose. And it's a little hard to tell where it is because the face is in the way, but that's not an issue at all. If you go to the face layer here, the second one, we want to just temporarily hide it for now. So we're actually going to click that to hide it. It's not gone, it's still there. We're just temporarily moving it off. But as we're working back on this layer, let's make sure we're on the correct one. So again, click on this green one, the top one. And we will use, I would say, the circle is closest to the eyeball shape. So the ellipse tool, and like I said, click shift, hold it, and that makes an eye. I guess Alex can field some questions as I continue to add a little bit more detail.
Yeah, basically, right now Esther's just going to be building up a few more layers of shapes and changing the color and moving them around to build the raccoon. So now would be a perfect time to ask questions if you have any, either about what we've been doing so far or about Illustrator in general or anything. For instance, like I know we didn't really explain layers too well since we've already been over them in previous workshops, but if you guys weren't at any of the previous workshops, just let me know and I can give you a rundown on that. Otherwise, we are just going to be layering different shapes.
Okay, and just to demonstrate, I don't know if any of you saw, but I had the little eye shine here, and when I tried to place it on it, you can't see it anymore. And actually, it's not a problem. It's still there, it's just hidden. And so what I would do is actually bring it over close to the shape, and I want this to be on top. And so you can see that it's still selected for this eye shine. I would right click on it, go to arrange, and I would bring it to the front, which didn't work because I selected multiple things.
I think it's on the wrong layer.
Oh, it's on the wrong layer. Again, layers are very important. I'm currently on the reference layer, so no matter what I do, it will be on the bottom. So I'll just Control X. I'm going to cut this out, go back to the correct layer and paste it there, and then reattempt to bring it forward, which is also not working. Funny.
You should just move it out of the reference layer and then lock the reference layer.
Yeah.
You use the drop down.
There we go.
Yeah, everybody has a different workspace, but I like always keep my layers panel open just so I can see like where things are, and because I like moving things manually instead of using the arrange menu. But again, in Illustrator there's like 50 million ways to do the same thing for literally everything. So there's no like one right way to do it. It's kind of helpful and it's also kind of confusing. And right now Esther's switching back to the pen tool to make this sort of almond shape for the eye. And now she's using the direct selection tool just to like stretch it out a bit.
Okay, and now that I have one eye, there's no need to draw it twice. So I will use the regular selection tool, select the entire surface that I want, and I can group these elements together. And then, like earlier, Control or Command C, and then Command Control V, make a duplicate, and we can do the flipping thing like the face earlier. So again, back in Properties, select that, flip it over, and then drag it to where we'd like it to be. And then for the nose, for the sake of time, I'm not going to trace it with the pen tool. I'm just going to call it a somewhat oval shape. And just to assess to see what it looks like, we can go back to layers and reopen the face shape. Okay, so clearly we can't really see the almonds because the eye color is too close to the raccoon. Not a problem. I can change it, but since I've grouped it already, it gives me this question mark. And so what you can do is you can ungroup these layers, which again, just right click and ungroup, which allows me to make the change quite easily. Same thing for the right eye. Okay, that's really dark. And for the face shape, I'm going to make it a slightly lighter gray. Okay. And another thing that's very trademark for a raccoon is actually the markings on its face. And so when I'm making the layer, I want to be careful about where I'm putting it. If I create a layer at the very top, the face markings will cover the eyes. And so that means we want the markings to be above the face shape. And so we're going to select the face shape and then add the layer on top. If you had the layer and let's say you accidentally made it on top, it's not an issue. Go ahead and just click it and drag it to where it needs to be. So we call those face markings. And I'm just going to really roughly and quickly use the pen tool. So again, shortcut P or on the left side and just trace exactly where the markings would be. It's a little distracting to work with a pen tool when it has a fill, so you can get rid of that. easily. So again, click that and then none, and then open up a stroke. So let's say black. We can change the color later if we'd like.
One thing to keep in mind about layers in Illustrator that I found really hard to get used to as somebody who uses like Photoshop and like Paint Tool SI and stuff is that even if you're working on a layer, if you click on something else on a different layer, you will automatically go to that different layer. I think there's a way to change this in settings, but like the default is that when you select something, you will go to that layer. So just if you're like having trouble getting things to go in front of other things in the right order, just keep that in mind and check your layers panel often.
Okay, I'm gonna speed run through this. Okay, and then now I'm satisfied with the shape of the face marking. I'm gonna make it black. I can actually click and do it manual, but there's also a little trick here. If you look at the arrow here, it'll swap exactly what you have in your fill-in stroke. And so that's perfect. I don't want a stroke and I want a black fill. And that does it for me. And I'm gonna put in the face shape to see what it looks like. Okay, it's somewhat looking more like a raccoon. There's definitely plenty of other things I could add. For example, if I wanted to add markings for the ears, that's also easily doable with the pen tool. You can just outline some of the different markings or details it has. And add one here, pen tool. Are there any questions, Alex?
Nothing in the chat so far.
Cool. Raccoon looks very derpy. That's okay.
It's pretty good to me.
And the last thing I'll add is maybe a set of whiskers. Let's do, I don't know, white whiskers. So with the pen tool, I'm not really following the reference image at this point, and that's perfectly fine. Pen tool.
Oh yeah, okay, so we got a question about, can you explain more about when you should be making new layers? I think actually in Illustrator, you can theoretically do everything on the same layer, unlike Photoshop or something, since everything is easily movable. But generally, you want things sort of like similar elements grouped together on the same layer. So for instance, if this picture had like a background, we would probably want that to be on a separate layer under everything else. And then we put the base shape on one layer, and then we put the eyes on one layer and the markings on another layer. It sort of just depends on how complex your image is. And then also if you have different elements like text or something, or for instance, if you have things that you want to lock into place and not mess around with later, then you probably want to put those on their own layer, just so that it's easy to like hide and reveal groups of certain elements when you want to draw different parts of your picture. Does that make sense? Okay, great. Yeah, there's no like hard and fast rule about it, but it's basically just whatever is the most convenient for your project.
There are obviously a lot more details I can add, but for the purpose of the workshop, I'll call it a day for now. And we're going to move on to learning how to save and exporting.
Yeah, so with Illustrator, you can save and export in multiple formats. PNG and JPEG are just regular image files that you would find in any program, and that's what we're going to be using today. But the big strength of Illustrator is that it makes scalable images that don't lose their resolution, right? And if you want to do that, you would export it as an SVG, which is a scalable file that's designed for the web. So if you're making a graphic for like a website or something that you wanted to display clearly on different sizes of browser window, then you would want to export it as an SVG. In this case, though, we just want an image, so we're going to use PNG. And the resolution is determined by something called DPI, or also sometimes PPI, pixels per inch. And this just determines that like if you were to print out this image, how many pixels would be the equivalent of 1 inch. So the higher your DPI is, the higher resolution your image will be. And 300 DPI is pretty standard. So we're going to go ahead and export it. I will say that sometimes Illustrator is a little weird and files will get bigger than you expected. So if you're getting like weird like 5,000 pixel exported PNGs, just check like your DPI and your canvas size.
All right, before we export, we want to make sure we have exactly what we want on the board. So we don't need the reference image and we don't need the guideline. And so that's actually on our most bottom layer here. And if you click on the left icon, it says toggles visibility, you can turn everything off. And so ideally, this is what we're exporting as our final product. So Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, so once you've hidden everything you don't want, just go up to File and then Export. And then Export As. We've got PNG selected at the bottom, and then you can just enter your name, mapache-yeehaw.png, and then go ahead and export it into whatever file location you want. Here we have the options for resolution and for transparency in the background, but you can also pick a solid background if you want. Oh yeah, we got an edgy mapache with a black background. And there you have it. So thanks for coming to our Adobe Illustrator speed run. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Anyway, now that we're finished with the demo, we're going to go back to the presentation. Basically, you can apply these techniques to a lot of different things that you can use Illustrator for. So logos and graphics are a really common one, icons like we showed you before. But also you can use it for different elements of web design, like if you want to make, I don't know, a specific type of button for your web page. And then you can use it for more complex illustrations like we've shown here. And if you guys were following along during the workshop, or if you want to follow along afterwards with the recorded version, we would love to see what kind of animals you guys create. Basically, we have all the steps written down, but the basic concept is you just grab a reference photo and then you trace over it with the pen tool and you use different shapes to layer on top of each other and create your animal. And again, we want to specify that like any vector program is okay for this. So like Figma, Inkscape, and Vector are really great free alternatives to Illustrator that are not like 20 bucks a month. If you want any help using those programs, you can go ahead and let us know. They're pretty similar to Illustrator, but like the interface is different, so it can be a little tricky. And I'm going to drop the link to submissions in the chat right now, but it will also be accessible later if you guys want. And then if you do, you can be featured on our social media. And yeah, please make a cow. I want to see your cow. Yeah, one thing to keep in mind is that vector programs are really tricky compared to things like Photoshop where you're basically just drawing on the screen. But it gets way easier over time once you get used to how to use the pen tool and everything like that. So just be patient and practice and try to have fun with it.
Awesome. So a preview for our next upcoming event, which is same time next week on Thursday. We're having a guest speaker. Her name is Andrea, and she's actually a UCSB alum. So it will be really neat to hear from someone who has been in your shoes. She graduated with a fine arts degree, and she'll be sharing her experience of navigating all the art resources that are available here on campus. And please connect with us. We have our website, which actually will host the recording to this workshop, as well as the slide deck that we're going through currently. Slack is also a great place to get in touch with us. We always shoot out reminders there. And if any community members have maybe an inkling or like a thought about, oh, you could maybe try out or learn some skills at XYZ place, they'll drop it in the chat as well. So it's just a great place to connect with people and get in touch with what resources are around. And as always, social media is great. So like, follow, subscribe. And that's the end of our presentation. So thank you so much for coming out. We really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you everybody. I dropped some links in the chat if you guys need them, so you can go ahead and join our Slack and let us know if you have any questions. Thank you so much for coming.